Right, a while ago I did a video on replacing the thermostat on a Duratec HE 2-liter Ford. That's in my European Mondeo, but it's the same setup more or less in a Focus Mark II, which is a more popular car. This is the old original thermostat that I failed, that I replaced rather, that failed. You can see here the broken arm. And so this video is not going to be about replacing it or how to replace it. I mean, I already did a video on that. So if you just want to find out how to go about that, then you need to go watch that video. This is rather just a follow-up to that. And so I've developed two problems as a result of what I did as shown in that video. Firstly, I have a computer error coming up in the scan tool, which is relating to the, I think, the heater inside this thing. That's what the electrical connector on this is. It's powered for a heater which allows the car to deliberately open the thermostat rather than letting it just happen automatically. And that seems to have failed on the cheap Chinese thermostat that I was using as a replacement. So the lesson there is don't rely on cheap Chinese thermostats off eBay. So that's my bad. And the other problem I had is I was starting to get very minor leaks around the hose fittings here, where the hoses go on these nipples. Very minor leaks, and I recall now what the problem I think is. One of two possibilities. One, the way these things are manufactured, they're put together in two halves, and the edges, the seams of the two halves meet along these ridges. And on the cheap Chinese one, the ridges are just they're not filed down properly, so you get this nasty sort of step change in the surface. And I think the hose is just having a hard time, getting a good seal around it. And the second problem that might be causing my leak is that I thought I'd be clever and replace these spring type clamps which go on the hose like this. I thought I would replace them with stainless steel worm type hose clamps, screwing with the ones that you screw up. And that seems to have been a mistake, because on further research it turns out that they are not the most reliable in terms of leaks, whereas these spring style ones, they maintain a constant tension, because they're a spring, obviously, whereas the screw up ones are only as tight as you screw them. So with varying temperatures, that can cause problems, because you don't have the constant tension that you get from these. So what I'm going to do is replace the Chinese thermostat with another one that I'll show you in a second, and I'll put these back on at the same time. One of the reasons I didn't want to reuse them was I had a lot of trouble working these because I didn't have the right kind of tool. But now I have the vice grip here, and unlike trying to use a pair of pliers, these are I won't call it easy, but they are workable. That requires a lot of strength. Now that's something that I can put onto the hose and work even in the tight confines of the engine, and that should allow me to do it in a feasible way. And once they're in place, just release it and make sure you are keeping a good grip on your tool as you do it. Okay, so that's about the clips. Now here is the new thermostat. Now I still didn't go for a genuine Ford because I just can't quite face up to the cost. The genuine Ford ones with the heaters built in them, something like, you're looking at several $100s. So I compromised again. This is a Dorman product, which is a company that makes a raft of aftermarket OEM products. And, because they have some kind of decent reputation, and just because it's a company that's putting their name on something, unlike the random Chinese eBay stuff, I thought that it, should be a big improvement. And this is it. If you want to compare it to the Ford, then there are some noticeable differences. For example, in the stat itself, you can see that the Ford one has this sort of plastic cage around the column, and within the spring, the spring is also a lot more substantial. It's wider, and the metal of the spring itself is thicker. So this looks a bit cheaper, and also the plastic looks considerably cheaper, and that may just be me not knowing what I'm talking about when it comes to plastics engineering, but this has this sort of shiny, tacky feel to it. It just feels lighter and cheaper. And when I look at the hose fittings, they still have this problem with the significant ridges along where the two halves of the moldings are mated together. And I've actually filed this down here myself already in anticipation of having problems. I just used a nail file and filed it as carefully as I could to make it smooth. And also around these bits where you have the raised section of the nipple, that's really the bit that's sort of projecting into the rubber of the hose, and that's what you're sort of expecting to do some work in terms of sealing. Hopefully the hose clamps themselves are just a sort of secondary part of the whole sealing thing. So yeah, this is not good. And if you look closely around here, you can see some gouges where obviously that's not me that's done that it came like that. So this is where the workers in the factory have done the filing themselves, but basically they just haven't done a good job of it. And the moldings and the matings is just not done to a very fine tolerance, let's say. So let's we'll go put it in the car, and we will see, and hopefully at least the electronics will not die after a few months like the other Chinese one did, and hopefully we won't get any leaks. We'll just have to see. Okay, so in the process of replacing this old Chinese piece of crap with the new Dorman stat, I'll also show you how to avoid having to replace all of your coolant every time you replace a thermostat. And I won't show you all of the stat replacement steps because they're in the other video, but normally you would replace all of the coolant at the same time because it's much easier to drain all of the coolant and then work on a stat, because you're going to lose a lot of coolant if you just pull off the stat without having drained it first. And the tricky bit about this is that you can't just recover the existing fluid from the radiator drain plug, because if you try that, it just sprays, the drain plug just sprays it everywhere, and the fluid would end up all contaminated and unusable. So what I'm doing here is I've disconnected the top recovery hose from the expansion tank, and it reaches down to the ground. And I am then siphoning from the system as much fluid as I can into a clean catchment tray. If you're going to do this, be very careful. Of course, don't swallow any of the coolant because it's toxic. You don't want to poison yourself, and rinse your mouth out once you've got it started. And once it is started, it'll just sort of dribble into the tray for a while. Cover the tray with a lid so that you don't get any dust or stuff falling into it. It's quite slow, so you'll need to be patient. I got roughly maybe 2 liters out in total. That was enough to sort of drain the expansion tank, but no more than that. And then after that, I had to get a bit more inventive because I still wanted more fluid out. So I got a bike pump, and I put the tire fitting on the bike pump up against the expansion tank nipple where I disconnected the hose, and was just able to apply a bit of pressure to the system. With every stroke of the pump, I'd get a little bit more fluid out until I exhausted those opportunities. Then I reattached the hose and removed the stat. So again, if you want to know how to remove and replace the stat, then watch my other video. What I will say is that the worm gear hose clamps that I had used and that were then causing a leak, as I explained before, they were quite loose, despite the fact that I had really tightened them a lot when I installed them previously. I tightened them down so much that I was concerned about cracking the plastic nipples on the thermostat. But when I went to undo them now, they were very, very loose, so they were easy to undo. Now, if you're taking off the hoses and the stat without having drained the coolant fully, then you will get a bit come out of the stat. That's unavoidable. So use some rags or preferably a lot of absorbent paper just packed around the stat underneath it, of course, and that'll hopefully prevent you getting too much coolant over the engine and making a mess. And this on the floor here, you can see how much I lost after I pulled off both hoses. And then I'll just skip forward. This is now the new stat is now, the Dorman stat is now installed on the head at this point. And I'll just show you using these spring clamps, which I previously didn't do because I figured it was too difficult. So you need vice grips, obviously. But it's not still that easy. What I'll say is that what I worked out is it's best to position the vice grips with the clamps held open in the final position rather than putting them on the hose first. Because if you put them on the hose and then try to maneuver the hose onto the nipples on the stat, you'll find that the vice grips holding the clamps will just become a huge problem and you won't be able to maneuver them around, because there's just no room. Everything's so awkward on the Duratec. So what I suggest is to put the clamps on the nipple, and with the vice grips holding them open, and then push the hose onto the nipple and through the clamp at the same time. And then, of course, once everything's in the right position, you release the grips, and the clamp will do its job. And here I'm doing the second hose, and you can see how I've got the vice grips and the clamp resting in position. I'm not even holding the vice grips, while I put the hose on, and then release the clamp, and there's the final hose done. Okay, then I put the safely recovered fluid back in, and you'll need to top up any lost fluid as necessary, of course. And the moment of truth is to start the engine and just watch the hoses and the gasket between the stat and the engine head as it warms up. And in my case, not a single drop of a leak. So excellent. So yeah, the lesson there is spring clamps just work in a way that worm gear types don't. So yeah, how about that? Right, and I also needed to clear my PID error regarding the stat heater electronics. And of course I'll need to check that it doesn't return, but I don't have any reason to believe that it will. And on that topic we will see about the Dorman thermostat. It's not leaking, so the molding is okay, combined with those with the spring clamps back in use. So I guess that's okay. And we will see how long the stat itself lasts. The Ford stats have a habit of their little plastic arms on the stat breaking. And I don't necessarily think that the Dorman's going to be any better, but you never know, it may be. But I can't comment on that until it's run the test of time, of course. All I can say for now is that it is working electronically and it's not leaking. So great. Okay, that's it. Hope that was helpful. Have fun.